Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiaochin, and I'm moderating the fourth YouTube session of the 8th fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project itself by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the award-winning science fiction author, Arkady Martine. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Arkady.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Well, just to tell you guys a bit more about Arkady, she's a speculative fiction writer, and as her alter ego, Dr. Anna Linden Weller, a historian of the Byzantine Empire and a city planner. She's definitely a woman of many talents and interests. Under both names, she writes about border politics, narrative and rhetoric, risk communication, and the ages of the world. Her debut novel, A Memory Called Empire, won the 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novel. Arkady lives in New Mexico, United States, with her wife, the author Vivian Shaw. Now, aside from spending time with us here today, Arkady has also generously donated some fantastic goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Goodie number 1 is Arkady Martine's Books and Swag bundle, which was for US donors only. And this consisted of one signed and personalized hardcover edition of A Memory Called Empire, one signed and personalized hardcover edition of A Desolation Called Peace, one exclusive TEIXCALAAN info fish stick, one set of A Memory Called Empire bookmarks. Now, unfortunately for the rest of you guys, there were only 2 sets of this gorgeous and exclusive bundle available, and both of them have already been snapped up by generous donors, Pat Roos, and someone who wishes to remain anonymous. Thank you so much to both donors for picking it up. But fear not, there are still some more goodies available from Arkady, and these are available to donors worldwide. Now, goodie number 2 is a 30-minute one-to-one video chat with Arkady, and she has graciously donated 2 30-minute one-to-one video chat sessions to be claimed by 2 Read for Pixels donors who are aspiring authors or book fans. She'll be happy to chat about everything from Byzantine history to the art and craft of writing powerful speculative fiction with the donors who snag these sessions. The video chat will be conducted in English, and you may choose to have it via Zoom or Skype. Now, please note that Arkady reserves the right to decline the donor. This is probably very unlikely, but in the unlikely event that she does so, you may choose one of the many other authors we have available for one-to-one video chats as a replacement. Now, and goodie number 3, Arkady Martine critiques your work in progress. Now, she is offering a chance for one Read for Pixels donor to have up to a maximum of 10,000 words of their work in progress critiqued by her in writing via email. And this opportunity includes one written critique of the donor's submission and one follow-up question via email with Arkady after she has sent the donor her critique. There is only one of this opportunity available, and it is a rare chance for anyone working on getting their first book published to get expert guidance from one of today's finest speculative fiction authors. So please do give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now, if you're watching this session on YouTube right now, you will also be able to ask Arkady questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Juliana, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Arkady to answer. And now, over to Arkady. What will you be reading for us today?
So I thought I would read from the opening of A Desolation Called Peace, which is the second book in the TEIXCALAAN series. And I am going to be reading 2 sections from the first chapter, both about the Yaltlek 9 hibiscus, who probably is one of the most awesomely badass women in my series. So,
Great. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Nine Hibiscus watched the cartograph cycle through its last week of recorded developments for a third time, and then switched it off. Without its pinpoint star gleams and fleet movement arcs inscribed in light, the strategy table on the bridge of Wait for the Wheel was a flat black expanse, dull matte, as impatient as its captain for new information. There was none forthcoming. Nine Hibiscus didn't need to watch the cartograph again to remember how the displayed planet points had winked first distress red and then out of communication black, vanishing like they were being swallowed by a tide. No matter how thickly laid the lines of incoming TEIXCALAAN ships were shown on that cartograph, none of them had advanced into the flood of blank silence. Beyond this point, Nine Hibiscus thought, not without a shimmering anticipation, we are quite afraid to see. Her own Wait for the Wheel was the second closest vessel to the communicationless swath. She'd sent only one ship farther out than she'd take her own people. That was the hybrid scout gunner called Knife Point's Knife Blooming, a near invisible sliver of a ship that slipped free of her flagship's open mod hangar and into the silent black. Sending it might have been Nine Hibiscus's first mistake, as Her Brilliance the Emperor 19 Ads' newest Yautlik, commander of fleet commanders, with multiple TEIXCALAAN legions under her control. An emperor made new Yautlekim when that emperor wanted to make a war. The one but got the other. Nine Hibiscus had heard that old saying the first time when she'd been a cadet, and thought it herself approximately once a week, absent confirmation of absolute observed truth. 19 Ads, new crowned, had very badly wanted to make a war. Now, at the very forefront of that war, Nine Hibiscus hoped sending Knife Point hadn't been a mistake after all. It would be useful to avoid unforced errors, considering how new a Yautlik she was. It would be useful to avoid errors at all. But Nine Hibiscus had been an officer of the Six Outreaching Palms, the TEIXCALAAN, the Imperial Military, hands outstretched in every direction, long enough to know that errors in war were inevitable. So far, Knife Point was running as quiet as the dead planets up ahead, and the cartograph hadn't updated in 4 hours. So that gambit could be going any way at all. She leaned her elbows on the strategy table. There'd be elbow prints later, the soft pillowing flesh of her arms leaving its oils on the matte surface, and she'd have to get out a screen cleaner cloth to wipe them away. But Nine Hibiscus liked to touch her ship, know it even when it was just waiting for orders, feel, even this far from its engine core, the humming of the great machine for which she served as a brain, or at least a ganglion cluster, a central point. A fleet captain was a filter for all the information that came to the bridge, after all. And a Yautlik was more so. A Yautlik had farther reach, more hands to stretch out in every possible direction. More ships. Nine Hibiscus was going to need every one of them she had got. The Emperor herself might have wanted a war to cut the teeth of her rulership on, but the war that she'd sent Nine Hibiscus out to win was already ugly. Ugly and mysterious. A poison tide lapping at the edges of TEIXCALAAN. It had begun with rumors. Stories of aliens struck, destroyed, vanished without warning or demands, leaving shattered ship pieces in the void if they left anything at all. But there were always horror stories of spooks in the black. Every fleet soldier grew up on them, passed them down to new cadets. And these particular rumors had crept inward from the Empire's neighbors, from Eradicate and Lucelle Station. Nowhere central, nowhere important. Not until the old Emperor, eternally sun-caught Sixth Direction, died. And in his dying declared that all the rumors were true. After that, the war was inevitable. It would have happened anyway, even before 5 TEIXCALAAN colony outposts on the other side of the jump gate in Praswantlak sector went as silent and as dull as stones, just where those horror stories would have crawled out for them, if they were going to crawl out of the black spaces between the stars at all. It merely might have happened slower. Her Brilliance 19 Ads had been Emperor for 2 months, and Nine Hibiscus had been Yautlik for this war for almost half that time. Around her, the bridge was both too busy and too quiet. Every station was occupied by its appropriate officer. Navigation, propulsion, weaponry, comms, all arrayed around her and her strategy table, like a solid, scaled-up version of the holographic workspace she could call into being with her cloud hook, the glass and metal overlay over her right eye, that linked her, even here on the edge of the TEIXCALAAN Imperium, to the great data and story networks that held the Empire together. Every one of the bridge's stations was occupied, and every occupant was trying to look as if they had something to do besides wait and wonder if the force they had been sent to defeat would catch them unawares and do whatever it was that these aliens were doing that stuffed out planetary communication systems like flames in a vacuum. All of her bridge officers were nervous, and all of them were tired of being patient. They were the fleet, the 6 outreaching palms of TEIXCALAAN. Conquest was their style, not massed waiting on the edge of the inevitable, paused in worrisome silence at the very forefront of 6 legions worth of ships, nearest to the danger and yet still unmoving. At least when her brilliance 19 ads had made her Yautlik to prosecute this war, Nine Hibiscus thought, she'd let her keep her own ship as flagship. Each of these officers was a TEIXCALAAN Leitzlim she'd worked with, served with, commanded. Each of them she'd led to victory at the uprising at Koran system less than 3 months ago. They were hers. They'd trust her a little longer. Just a little longer. Until Knife Point came back with some actionable information and she could let them loose a bit, taste a little blood, a little dust and fire blooming from the death of an alien ship. A fleet could last a long time, fed on those sips of sugar water violence, as long as they believed their Yautlik knew what she was doing. Or that had always been how Nine Hibiscus had felt when she used to serve under Fleet Captain Nine Propulsion, before Nine Propulsion had gone off to pilot a desk planet-side in the city. She'd risen all the way to Minister of War under the last dead, lamented Emperor Nine Hibiscus, who spelled her name with the same number glyph Nine Propulsion used, and hadn't yet regretted that late teenage, star-eyed choice of how to style herself in written form. Had thought that she'd probably be minister under the new one. Had expected that. But instead, Nine Propulsion had taken retirement almost immediately upon 19 Ads' extension. She'd left the city entirely, gone home to her birth system. No chance yet for one of her old subordinates to drop by and ask her what for and why now, and all the usual gossip. Instead, Nine Hibiscus, bereft of the comfort of mentorship, she'd been lucky to have had it so long, if she was being honest with herself, had woken up one shift with an urgent infofish stick message from the Emperor herself. A commission. If this war is winnable, I want you to win it. The Emperor's dark cheekbones like knives, like the edges of the flares of the sun sphere throne she sat on. And now, calling her back to herself in this present moment, a low voice to Nine Hibiscus's left, one that wouldn't startle her at that distance, the only one who could sneak up that close, regardless. Nothing yet, then, sir. 20 Cicada, her accountless prime, highest ranking of all the officers who served directly under the fleet captain and not in another administrative division. He was her adjutant and second in command, which is one of the ways that rank could be used. She couldn't imagine having anyone else in the position save for him. He had his arms folded neatly across the cadaverous thinness of his chest, one eyebrow an expressive arch. As always, his uniform was impeccable, perfect TEIXCALAANly, the very image of a soldier in a propaganda holofilm, if you ignored the shaved head and how he looked like he hadn't eaten in a month. The curling edges of green and white ink tattoos just visible at his wrist and throat when the uniform shifted as he moved or breathed. Nothing, said Nine Hibiscus, loud enough for the rest of the bridge to hear. Absolute quiet. Knife Point's running silence, and at their usual speed, they're not going to be back for another shift and a half, unless they're running for something nasty. And there isn't much Knife Point would run from. 20 Cicada knew all that. It wasn't for him. It was for how 18 Chisel in navigation, shoulders dropped an inch, how 2 Foam on comm actually sent the message she'd been hesitating on for the past 5 minutes, reporting continued clear skies to the rest of their multi-legion fleet. Excellent, said 20 Cicada. Then you won't mind if I borrow you for a moment, Yautlik? Tell me that we are not still having problems with the escaped pets in the air ducts on deck 5, and I will not mind being borrowed, Nine Hibiscus said, widening her eyes in fond near mockery. The pets, small furred things that vibrated pleasantly, and ate vermin, a peculiar variant on cat that was endemic to Koran, had come aboard during their last planetfall there when she'd still been Fleet Captain Nine Hibiscus of the 10th Legion, not Yautlik yet. The pets had not been a problem, or something Nine Hibiscus had even known about, until they had decided to reproduce themselves, and had moved into a Deck 5 air duct to do it. 20 Cicada had complained vociferously about how they were disturbing the homeostasis of Wait for the Wheels environment. It is not the pets, said 20 Cicada. That I promise. Conference room? If he wanted privacy to discuss whatever it was, it couldn't be good. Perfect, Lantibiscus said, pushing herself upright. She was twice as wide as 20 Cicada, but he moved around her as if he had solidity enough to match. Two-Foam, your bridge. My bridge, Outback, Two-Foam called, and that was as it should be. So Nantibiscus went to see what was wrong with her ship. Her fleet. Now. Wait for the Wheel had 2 conference rooms right off the bridge, a large one for strategy meetings and a small one for fixing problems. Nine Hibiscus had repurposed the latter from an auxiliary weapon control station when she'd first been made captain. A ship needed a space to have private official conversations, she'd thought then, and she'd been largely right. The small conference room was the best place to solve personnel issues, recorded on the ship's cameras, visible and invisible all at once. She took 20 Cicada inside, cueing the door to open with a micro-movement of one eye that directed her cloud hook to talk to the ship's algorithmic AI. 20 Cicada wasn't given to preambles. Nine Hibiscus had always known him to be efficient, brisk and clean, and mercilessly direct. He preceded her through the door, and to her surprise did not turn to give his report. Instead, he headed directly for the room's narrow viewport and put his hand up against the plastisteel separating his body and the vacuum. Nine Hibiscus felt a flicker of warmth at the familiarity of the gesture, warmth mixed with uncomfortable dread. Like her, 20 Cicada touched the ship, but he touched it like he was longing for space to come in and take his hand. He'd done that for as long as Nine Hibiscus had known him, and the two of them had met on their very first deployment. Which was long enough ago by now that Nine Hibiscus didn't particularly feel like counting the years. Swarm, she said, the nickname he'd gotten back on that deployment, the one she had mostly given up on calling him for the sake of officer hierarchy. Spit it out. What's going on? Sir, he said, still staring at the black, gentle corrective for the cameras, even if the recordings of this room would never be seen by anyone but her, who outranked a Yautlik. But he was so correctly a fleet officer, a TEIXCALAAN, seamless in the role of countless primate adjutant, a man who could have walked out of the expansion history or opening frontier poems, except that the system his people had come from hadn't even been absorbed into TEIXCALAAN when either of those works had been written. Except that he still kept up some of that system's peculiar cultural religious practices. But hesitance wasn't one of those either, or at least not one she knew about. Yes, Icantlos? Report. Finally he turned, widened his eyes in wry and resigned amusement, and said, in about 2 hours, sir, you're going to get an official communique addressed to you specifically as the Outback in charge of this combined fleet from Fleet Captain 16 Moonrise on the parabolic compression of the 24th Legion, demanding to know what the delay in action is. It will be countersigned by Fleet Captain 40 Oxide of the 17th and Fleet Captain 2 Canal of the 6th. We have a problem. The 17th and the 6th, Nine Hibiscus asked. They hate each other. That rivalry is 200 years old. How did 16 Moonrise get them both to sign? They absolutely had a problem. Her combined fleet was 6 legions strong, her own 10th and 5 more, each with its own fleet captain newly subordinate to her authority. The traditional Yautlik 6, both tactically effective and symbolically sound, if a somewhat limited amount of manpower to win a war with. Enough, though, to start a war, which Nine Hibiscus understood her purpose here to be. To start and then to win with whatever resources she could need to call up from the core of TEIXCALAAN if such resources were necessary. But if 3 of her initial Yautlik 6 were already willing to sign an opening salvo against her authority as Yautlik, she didn't need to say it. Both she and 20 Cicada knew what a letter like this one meant. It was a test, a press, to check for weak spots, a light barrage to find the best point to concentrate a wedge attack. It was bad enough that she'd been given both the 6th and the 17th Legions as part of her fleet in the first place, but she'd expected any ensuing conflict to be between them, something to carefully manage by doling out the best assignments equally, not this surprising show of political unity through displeasure. From what information I've received from my associates on their ships, said 20 Cicada, 16 Moonrise appealed on the one side to 40 Oxide's long experience compared to yours, and on the other to 2 Canal's vehement wish that she had been made Yautlik instead of you, and neither of them knew the other one had agreed until right before they agreed to send the message. There were reasons that 20 Cicada was nicknamed Swarm, and it wasn't just his peculiar name, a name with a living creature in it instead of a proper object or color or plant. Swarm was Swarm because he was everywhere at once. He knew someone on every ship in the fleet, and those someones tended to keep him well informed. Nine Hibiscus clicked her teeth together, considering. Politics, she said. All right, we've had politics before. Nine Hibiscus had had politics come after her more than once. Anyone who made fleet captain did. Anyone who made fleet captain and meant to keep the position, win victories for her legion, well, that sort of TEIXCALAAN Slim made enemies. Jealous ones. Every time there'd been politics before, though, Nine Hibiscus had also had Nine Propulsion in the Ministry as a threat of last resort. The new Minister of War, 3 Azimuth, was no one's friend in particular. Or at least she wasn't Nine Hibiscus's friend. 2 Canal and 40 Oxide aren't the point anyhow, said 20 Cicada. 16 Moonrise is. She's the instigator. She's the one you're going to have to defuse. Perhaps she'd like the point position when we do make our approach. 20 Cicada said, dry it processed ship's air. So direct, sir. She couldn't help grinning, teeth bared like a barbarian, a savage expression. It felt good on her face, felt like getting ready to act instead of waiting and waiting and waiting. They are insisting I'm over-hesitant. I can have that order composed. The 24th will be cast shouting into whatever void is eating our planets by shift change, if you like. One of the problems with 20 Cicada was that he offered her exactly what she wanted for precisely long enough for her to remember it was a bad idea. It was the kind of problem that ended up being one of 1,000 reasons Nine Hibiscus had never thought of replacing him with the soldier who came from a more assimilated world. No, she said. Let's do one better. The glory of dying first for the Empire is too good for 16 Moonrise, don't you think? Invite her to dinner instead. Treat her like a favored colleague, a prospective co-commander. A new Yaotlek like me needs allies, doesn't she? 20 Cicada's expression had become unreadable, like he was adjusting some value in a vast calculation of a complex system. Nine Hibiscus figured that if he was going to object, he would go ahead and object, and went on assuming he wouldn't. 4th shift, and that'll give her the travel time to get over to Wheel. Her and her adjutant will have a strategy discussion, just the 4 of us. As soon as the letter officially arrives, sir, I'll send that invitation back and alert the galley that we're expecting guests. 20 Cicada paused. I don't like this, for the record. It's too early for anyone to be pushing you like this. I didn't expect it. I don't like it either, Nine Hibiscus said. But since when has that made a difference? We persevere, Swarm. We win. We do tend to. A flicker again of that dry amusement. But the wheel goes around, Nine Hibiscus said. That's why we're the weight. Like she was one of her soldiers in the mess. Ship phrase slogan and smile. Game on, he thought. 16 Moonrise. Whatever it is you want from me, come play. Over the comm then, two phones disembodied voice. Yaotlek, I had visual on knife point, 3 hours early. Coming in fast. Coming in hot. Stars! Nine Hibiscus spat, quick instinctive curse, just for her and 20 Cicada to hear, and then signaled her cloud hook to patch her into the comm frequency. On my way. Don't fire on anything until we know we have to.
Lovely. Thank Thanks so much for that nice reading, Arkady.
I love reading her. She's really fun.
She is indeed. So let's jump straight into the questions. So both your novels and short stories feature plenty of complex women with agency who are also very human. For example, your TEIXCALAAN duology has protagonist Ambassador Mahit Smar and Information Ministry Officer Tracy Grass, as well as important characters like the Emperor's Confidant, 19 Arts, and Fleet Captain Nine Hibiscus, whom you just read about just now. So what or who are the inspirations for your female characters?
Well, part of it is that sometimes I build them out of like people I would love to be, or people who I can imagine being people I'd like to meet. There isn't a specific singular inspiration. Basically, I think that female characters are, I love writing women because I am one. But that's not really the real reason. It's because I really enjoy putting characters in general, but female characters especially, in situations where they have to make hard choices, have very interesting things happen to them, and have a lot of fascinating difficulty. So, and why not female characters? I mean, women are awesome.
So true. Yeah, and you know, all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes, including science fiction. So how do you break these stereotypes to create female characters with agency while dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
So, first of all, I try to write women like people as opposed to being like any particular stereotype. For that matter, I try to write men like people too.
Mm,
Like, if you just remember that people of all genre, all genders, all genres, people of all genres, probably that too, people of all genres and genders are people, and they all have the same kind of complex motivations, then it's pretty easy to sidestep the nastier stereotypes around gender. One of the things that I really enjoyed writing in the second TEIXCALAAN book, in Desolation especially, was a really good friendship between a man and a woman that wasn't sexualized, that was just like two people who really loved each other, and one of them is very definitely a woman and one of them is very definitely a man. And
mm,
that was a special thing for me to write, because some of my dearest friends are not of the same gender as me, and there are ways to be like the kind of friends who you need, and
mm.
have that be something that doesn't have to just be your own gender and doesn't have to be sexualized. Um, I don't know if I write a ton about misogyny because I don't want to. One of the things in TEIXCALAAN that was important to me when I was doing the world building and like thinking up how I wanted this world to work was that I didn't want it to matter whether people were men or women or some other gender. I wanted it to matter what they did.
Mm,
So I very deliberately tried to not have sexism and misogyny be the driving prejudices in this world. There's some really, really bad prejudices, but that's not one of them. In the work I'm working on now, which is set in a future version of Earth, there's a lot more misogyny because there's a lot of
mm.
it here. And that's been interesting to sort of deal with, like how much of it I wanted to center and how much of it I wanted to decenter, because sometimes I feel like when we, especially for speculative fiction writers, we don't have to write a world where misogyny is the dominant force in the lives of women and girls. We can show a world where that's not true, where the difficulties and problems people have are for different reasons than that.
Right. And that's great because that actually ties into a couple of questions that I will be bringing up later. You know, one about relationship, male female relationships, and about and part of your world as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, talking about but before that, talking about writing people as people. So your stories definitely pass the Bechdel test with the inclusion of complex relationships between women. So, and for those watching who are not familiar with the Bechdel test, it basically asks whether a work, whether book, movie, TV series, etc., features at least two women talking to each other about something other than men. Now, Arkady, why do you think many sci-fi authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
Well, quite honestly, I think if any kind of writer is not, unless you're writing about a place where there are no women, which there are stories where that happens, like single sex military, sure. It's laziness. It's just pure and utter laziness to not include the rest of people's lives aside from their interest or lack thereof in the opposite sex.
Mm. So, what can you suggest for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
I guess for women, like when I write women, I write about, like, it's just what people are interested in. Like, so there's a conversation in in Memory, which is between Mahit, the protagonist, and a relatively minor character named Five Agate, who is like an executive secretary type. And what they're talking about is politics, actually. And while they are addressing in some ways the existence of a male person being the emperor, what they're talking about is how people become emperors and what makes them like. And this is a conversation I've had in a very different context with my own female friends. Like, how does someone get elected to office? It's that conversation. It's the, why are the people in power and how did they get there? So it's like the conversations that people have are the conversations that we have every day. And in a story, they're heightened. Like when I'm like sitting down with my friend and being like, well, how did that guy get elected? I'm kind of joking around about it. But in a story, that conversation becomes like, what is the nature of imperial ideology? How does democracy work? But it's the same kind of conversation. And one of the things I really like about the conversation I'm pointing to in Memory is that that conversation turns into a conversation about Five Agate's choices to have had a child. And that's not really about like her as a woman. It's about her as someone who chose very deliberately to be a mother. And Mahit's kind of interest and being a little weirded out by that, but also really fascinated. And that's another kind of conversation, which I think is one that a lot of women and people with uteruses have with each other, which is not like necessarily about their own personal choices, but a sort of interest in the concept. Like, I personally don't have children. I'm exceptionally unlikely to. But I'm fascinated by why people choose to have children, what the drive is, what the benefits are, what the process is, like, how do you raise another creature? And those questions are like, they coincide simultaneously with the, so how do we fix politics? Or what kind of art did you go see at the museum? Conversations and stories are just conversations from real life, but louder, like darker, louder.
Yeah. So I feel like that kind of touches on, gender and cultural stereotypes. So that kind of jumps into my next question is, do you ever feel pressured by these stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable? And do you ever get any flack for not making a female character likable enough?
I think I get flack in general for making my characters not likable enough, because likable isn't what I go for. I go for interesting, not likable. But I don't know. I don't know if, I think I would have reached a different audience had my protagonist been a male, but I'm not sure that would have been an audience I'd wanted more or better or like wider. I like the audience I've got. I believe very much in, I guess, not challenging the reader, but like, here's the cards I'm putting down. If you want to play, you have to pick them up. This is what we got.
Right.
So likability is, I don't want people to like ditch the book because they can't stand hanging out with this person, but that's about as far as it goes. Like, a character you hate but are fascinated with is just as interesting to me anyway.
True, very true. And as I mentioned earlier, your stories give plenty of space and prominence to female characters, whether they are the protagonists, the supporting characters, or just in the background. And when I read your books, my general impression was that there seemed to be more women than men in your stories. I mean, I didn't count, but that was my overall impression. And they range from women holding the highest positions of authority to more everyday positions like fighter pilots, personal assistants, and clerks. So, do you think stories like yours that explore the theme that women can be empowered individuals in their own right and that men should respect women can help stop violence against women? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. And how, I guess, is by example. The thing that science fiction does, and this is why I write science fiction and why I love science fiction, is that it expands the possibility space. It's not the world that is. It is a possible world, a world that could be. And the more different possible worlds a person encounters or thinks about or experiences, the more options they have for their own choices. And a
Mm,
world in which women are just people and therefore are in all positions in life, from the lowest to the highest, is one that I imagine that someone reading it would maybe think, well, it's weird that our world isn't like that and wrong.
okay. Right. So this brings me to a question. You recently did AMA Ask Me Anything for it's
Mm-hmm.
also on Reddit Fantasy, and there was one interesting question that you didn't get to answer. So I thought I would include it here. So
Sure.
so JD Dennis asked, what would the mission of the Pixel Project look like in the world of the TEIXCALAAN Empire? Would it be an ongoing concern, or would the society of the empire have grown enough to negate the need?
Ooh, see, I don't know. I think that they might not recognize that. I think something like the Pixel Project would exist, but it might
Hmm.
not be about violence against women. It might be about violence against some other large minority group.
Ah.
Um, but I do think I mean, TEIXCALAAN's a living culture, so it's got activists and people trying to make it better. Um,
Mm,
and I mean, I don't think there isn't built in a ton of misogyny in the TEIXCALAAN Empire. And I mean, probably there's sexual politics because they're people, so there's
mm-hmm,
sexual politics, but it's not very gender based. I tend to think that the people in TEIXCALAAN, like, having a gender in TEIXCALAAN is like being really into your hair. It's really important to some people.
mm-hmm,
Everybody's got one, or maybe they don't. But
mm,
for some people, they spend a lot of time and effort on it, and for some people, they kind of don't bother. Um,
mm,
and therefore, I think something like the Pixel Project would probably be more about preventing violence against minority ethnic groups, or
mm,
preventing violence against sort of minority class groups, people who haven't done well in a particular like civil service exam and therefore been locked out of a lot of opportunity.
mm. Or maybe like 20 Takada, who believes in a
Mm-hmm.
religion that's looked down a bit by the
Oh
majority of the
yeah,
empire, right? Mm,
yeah. There's a lot of prejudice in TEIXCALAAN. Like it's one of those things where when people ask me about misogyny in TEIXCALAAN, I'm like, but there isn't any, and that does not mean it's a good place. That does not mean it's a good place at all. It is in fact kind of a rather terrible one in many ways.
mm,
But it would not make a difference whether 20 Cicada was a man or a woman or non-binary, if
mm.
to the fact that a lot of people are going to hate him because he's not fully assimilated.
True, very true. All right. We have a question from the audience. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
put it up. So, Misty306, Misty's a longtime supporter of our Read for Pixels campaign. So she asks, how did you feel when you learned that your debut novel was nominated and then won the Hugo Award? Should aspiring speculative fiction writers aim for that same goal?
God, no. You can't aim for awards. Like, awards are a thing that happens to you, and they're awesome. And I am incredibly proud and grateful to have been nominated and to have won the Hugo. but you cannot in any way predict them. And you cannot like game them or hope that they're going to happen to you and that will like fix your career. It's like I was delighted and really, really honored to be nominated and did not expect to win. It's my debut novel. Like, I've only done this one time. I'd hope I'd get better as I keep going. Like, that is my hope, is that every book I write is better than the previous one. So it was incredibly gratifying to get that kind of recognition from my peers and readers that early. But I had no expectation that I would win, none, and was very happy to. But it's like, this is a nice, lovely, great thing that happened to me and that I had almost no control over.
So it's a bonus. It's like winning the lottery. Okay, yeah. So you were reading about 20 Cicada and 9 Hibiscus in the opening thing, and the male-female relationship in your books, I feel, are generally quite equitable, and your main characters are respectful of women, their thoughts and decisions. Do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways sci-fi writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually, I think that's probably where I put most of the energy into, like, thinking about how I'm portraying, how I'm avoiding portraying misogyny in the TEIXCALAAN books, is that I want my male characters to not be flat, to not be unemotional, to not be, I mean, some of them are, because some people are, I like my female characters. I want my male characters to feel like they are people, that you could imagine why they do what they do, and that they are not, I never want, except in very rare occasions, to create someone who you can sum up in like one sentence, male or female. I think there's one character, and he's a side character, and he's like one of my least favorite characters in the book, because I dislike him so much. And that's Six Helicopter in A Memory Called Empire. And he's not on screen for very long, but he does some rather nasty things. I won't give too many spoilers, but I wrote him like every asshole bureaucrat that I have ever run into, and a specifically dude asshole bureaucrat. Like the guy who thinks that because he's got a gun and a clipboard, he can run the world. And I've met a lot of those guys, and they cause the kind of social and psychological damage that Six Helicopter causes. And I think that's, but I want that to be the exception. Like, that guy is awful, and he's a problem. So I want most of the male characters in my stories to be people with their own flaws and problems that aren't necessarily about their relationships with women. I have not, but could have written stories about how 12 Azalea figured out that 3 Seagrass was never going to date him. But that was something that happened a very long time ago in the story, and they are so far past that it's not important. You know? Yes. Like, so that's like a grad school fic. Someone go write it, like someone on AO3. I will not read it, I promise, but it's free for you.
There you go, fans. If you want to write some fiction, you've got a team there. Okay, so do you think that eventually the violent alpha male type character will phase out of sci-fi as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that will stick around for much longer than expected?
I don't know. For a science fiction writer, I'm bad at predicting the future. So I think that toxic masculinity is going to be with us for a very long time. It's pretty baked into a lot of different cultures in a lot of different ways. And undoing it and like figuring out other ways to be men and other ways to be women with each other is a long project. And it's a culturally dependent project, so the answers aren't going to be the same in different places or in different groups. But I do think that the sort of alpha male dude with gun trope it's certainly not the dominant character type in any of the science fiction I've been reading. And I read a lot of science fiction, so I'm pleased about that. There's a lot of different kinds of failure modes for dudes, the same way there's a lot of different failure modes for women. And I'd like to see more of them than that one.
Cool. All right, we have another question from the audience. Okay, so Oreo Lake asks, do you find that it's easier to write about living in tight control spaces since the apocalypse happens?
No, not at all. I find it is harder to write about anything. I don't like not leaving my house. I like going places. But I mean, I wrote 98% of both TEIXCALAAN books before the pandemic. So there's not much there about that. For me, I actually like tight spaces, like, personally. When I write Mahit's like affection for like her personal like dwelling pod on LaSalle Station, that's something I like stole from myself. I love little enclosed spaces where you're safe and alone. And I figured it would be a pretty adaptive trait for people who lived in a floating generation ship that someone parked like 15 generations ago. And there's a lot of people in a relatively small space. So either I figured there's two ways of dealing with that. You either like being kind of on top of everybody, and some people like that, like lie around in piles, or you like being alone and like wrapped up safe. It's sort of quiet. And I imagine that being really nice. It's like a capsule hotel.
So I'm guessing your closet might be one of your favorite spaces?
No, not really. I think I'm fairly well out of that one at this point. But
in more ways than one.
Yeah. But I like the like having walls around. I have in the bedroom I share with my wife, we have bookshelves around our bed, and that's really nice.
Nice. Okay, so stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change because they can help change cultural narratives and perspectives about social issues and traditions. In your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
I think you just tell the story, and if the story, the about question, because I'm a theme first writer, like fairly consistently. Like the first thing I get about a story is this is the one about the thing. And that's very different than a lot of people who like start with character or start with the scenario. But for me, probably at some point in my life, I will write a story which is the one about gender-based violence. I haven't written that story yet. And I think that if that's not the story you're writing, if your about question isn't answered by this is the one about gender-based violence or violence against women or whatever the version of it is for you, then your portrayal of violence against women or gender-based violence in a story that isn't about that has to be even more carefully considered. Because that's when you can make stereotypical mistakes because you're not thinking about it. You're just like reaching for things you know, because that's not the about. You're thinking about like, I'll use some of the abouts from my own work. You're thinking about the one about cultural assimilation, which is memory. So that's what you're thinking about, not, wait, are the only people who commit violence in this book men? Wait, did I do that? Did I mean to do that? Or are the only people who are victims of violence in this book women, which is a worse one. And if you're not paying attention because you're focused on something else, which is the central like thematic and emotional core of your work in that story, you can miss that kind of thing. And I think it's a really good checksum to run on your own writing, not just on this, but on most social issues that you care about. Like you want to run a similar checksum on, have I like been accidentally racist because I didn't think right about this and I just used a trope I knew that I've seen a million times that is a racist trope. And you want to catch that even before you show it to like your first reader, because it's like how not to be an asshole.
Okay, so do you think it's important for influential authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters in your stories that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings?
I think that it's important to just write women who are humans, like
Mm.
women who are people. I'm not I'm not an issue writer in a lot of ways. Like I'm not good at it. That's not where I come from as a writer. I'm not didactic. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about connotation and about what I want a reader to take away from spending a while in a world I made. And I never want a reader to come away with gender-based violence is fine or just something that happens to everybody. Like that's not what I want anyone to read my stories and walk out thinking.
Okay, fair. Okay, let's hop on to another topic. Let's talk about geek culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, geek culture in general, including science fiction, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated despite the rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female authors. Plus, there is still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks
Yes.
towards female geeks. So, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or conventions, more welcoming for women and girls?
Just so moderation, and like I mean that in the sense of having moderators and kicking people out of spaces who don't respect them and don't respect the community. And because a fan community is a community, it's for people who like something together. Like if you like the same thing, it's awesome to get to talk about that with people who also care. Like that's my favorite thing about fandom, is just that sense of commonality, that sense of shared joy.
Yeah.
And if somebody has decided that a particular kind of person doesn't get to have that, they don't deserve to be there. And like, I'm kind of harsh about this, but I basically just think that if you're going to harass people, if you're going to be cruel or gatekeepy or basically refuse to recognize other people's legitimate access to a media property, like, I'll just use my own stuff. TEIXCALAAN doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't even at this point belong to me. It's just there in the world. And if you love it, that's really cool. And I'm glad. But you don't deserve it more than the next guy.
Yep.
And the next guy doesn't deserve it more than you. It's all equal. Like everybody gets the same thing. Everybody can read the books. Everybody can enjoy them or not enjoy them as they like. And I feel like one of the things in fan culture is, and I think this is at least at heart a good-hearted thing, we want to be really inclusive. We want to make everybody feel like this is a place where you can be yourself, you can be you unvarnished, and that's a good thing. But I also think that that leads us to places where we allow people to be truly cruel to one another because they're nerds like us, right? But no, it's not okay. It just isn't. And that's why I believe in moderated spaces, that if people are harassing or gatekeepy, they get warned and asked to do better because everybody deserves chances. And if they keep doing it, they shouldn't ruin everybody else's fun. So we should have moderation so that they can't be there until they stop doing that.
Yeah, like one of our other Read for Pixels authors said, there's enough pie to go around, for everyone. We can all have a share of the pie.
There
Yeah.
is, that's true. There's
Mm.
plenty of pie.
Okay, so we're actually down to our final question. And this may be a bit of an obvious one, but you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti violence against women work as a whole. So, two questions to this. One, why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Because no one should be subject to violence because of their gender. Because I've said this like 18 times, women are people.
Yep.
People shouldn't experience violence against them,
Mm,
and especially not for something that is a brilliant aspect of being a human.
mhm.
Like, I mean, I speak as someone who was assigned female at birth and identifies as a woman. Um, it's great. I love it. Like, I'm really happy about that. If I had been assigned male at birth, I would still be a woman. Um, like, it's just,
Okay.
I love it.
Mm,
So it's, it's like, why would, it's horrible that so many women and girls experience violence because of something which is fantastic about their way of being in the world. And that shouldn't
mm,
happen. So,
yeah.
yeah, of course I support it.
And as an author, what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Essentially, modeling universes where it's not a default. And
Mm,
if you do include gender based violence in your stories, which I think there's a lot of stories that need to be told about gender based violence, I think it needs to be something that isn't treated as normal.
mm,
Like, even if it's set in a world where this happens to everybody, that's still not like a world that's an okay world.
yep.
Um, or even if it's like the centerpiece of a story. And I think that there are stories that really do need to be told about where the major event in a character's recent or historical life was a experience of gender-based violence. But that should be something that you're really careful with and really thorough with and
Mm,
not gloss.
right.
Because, I mean, it's not something that like one wants a reader to identify with like at all. But if a reader comes to that and has a similar experience in their own life, it should be one that they not necessarily identify with because everyone's experience is different, but one which they recognize as being a plausible version that someone took some care with. I think that's important.
Mm, mm. All right, cool. And we have come to the end of our Q&A session. I'm going to put myself back on screen. Oops. Let's see. Oh, my computer doesn't want to cooperate with me.
There you are.
Okay. There I am. Okay. So thank you so much, Arkady, for your great answers. And thank you to everyone out there for tuning in. I just want to remind everyone that Arkady has not only generously spent her time here with us today, but has also donated 3 exclusive goodie bundles as perks for donors who contribute to the Pixel Project's work. Now, goodie number one, which is 2 sets of Arkady Martine's books and swag bundle, which was for US donors only, has already been snapped up by 2 generous donors, Pat Roos and someone who wishes to remain anonymous. So thank you so much to both of you. But don't despair if you're an Arkady Martine or TEIXCALAAN fan or an aspiring writer. Arkady has 2 more goodies in store for you, and these have the added bonus of being available to donors worldwide. Goodie number 2 is a 30-minute one-to-one video chat with Arkady, and she has graciously donated 2 30-minute one-to-one video chat sessions to be claimed by 2 Read for Pixels donors who are aspiring authors or book fans. And Arkady will be happy to chat about everything from Byzantine history, which was her major, to the art and craft of writing powerful speculative fiction with you. The video chat will be conducted in English, and you may choose to have it via Zoom or Skype. Please note that Arkady reserves the right to decline the donor. And goodie number 3 is Arkady Martine critiques your work in progress. And she's offering a chance for one Read for Pixels donor to have up to a maximum of 10,000 words of their work in progress critiqued by her in writing via email. This opportunity includes one written critique of your submission, and one follow-up question via email with Arkady after she has sent you her critique. There is only one of this opportunity available, and it is a rare chance for anyone working on getting their first book published to get expert guidance from one of today's finest speculative fiction authors. There are also plenty more author goodies available from authors and publishers such as Brian McKellen, Sarah Rees Brennan, Jeannie Lin, Paul Tremblay, Sebastian de Castel, and Orbit Books, among others. New goodies will be released every week throughout this month. So please do give generously to help us reach our $5,000 goal. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now, I will share some details with you so that you know where to go and get these goodies. And there we go. So, you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at bit.ly/R4P RallyUp 2021. And do know that it's a case-sensitive site. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels and our past authors and upcoming author interviews, go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. Now this year we have something very special to share with you, and let me get that slide up for you. Okay. And here we go. So the Pixel Project is proud to announce that our very first charity anthology titled Giving the Devil His Due, which is kind of like a Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Women short story collection, was just released on Wednesday. Aside from the special limited edition cover, which you can see here, we have also teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors who contributed to the anthology to offer an exclusive limited edition bookplate for early bird buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates, that's 16 bookplates, and they'll be available on a first-come, first-served basis. Each bookplate also includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So if you know someone who has or is suffering from domestic violence or sexual assault, buying this book for them might be a gift in more ways than one. So for more information about the anthology and how to score a bookplate, you can visit bit.ly/Giving the Devil His Due. And you can order the anthology either in ebook or paperback form from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds from the sale of the anthology go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as Read for Pixels alive and kicking. So, to find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. So we've come to the end of our session today. Thanks once again to everyone for tuning in, and thank you to Arkady for spending so much time with us today. So we will say goodbye now. So have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world.